right, hi everyone. I had hoped that we would be back in the classroom when we were having this lecture, but snow day. So I'm going to be recording this video and posting it on YouTube just like I did with the video for Tuesday. So this is the video for February 18th. So a few announcements before we get into lecture. So remember that exam 2 is going to be opening right after our typical class time on February 18th. And then it will be open for a week, so it'll close right before our class starts next Thursday on February 25th. So also remember that we will not be meeting for class on February 23rd, which is sort of strange since we've already missed a few days, but it's in the syllabus that I would give you guys that day to take exam 2 if you would like. So exam 2 is going to have the same format as exam 1. I'll talk a little bit more about it after I cover the slides, but if you're a student who receives accommodations, please let me know if you need something different. So I've set up the accommodations for exam 2 the same way I set them up for exam 1. If you're going to be taking the test in person at Student Support Services, then you'll need to make an appointment with them, and then they'll send me what I need to send them the test. So let me know if you have questions. When we were discussing this chapter on Tuesday, or the video for Tuesday, we talked a little bit about attitudes towards sex, a little bit about when people are starting to have sex and how often people are having sex. And so carrying on with the theme of me saying the word sex a lot, we're going to start off talking about sociosexual orientations. Now here, I'm not talking about sexual orientations as in who an individual is attracted to. With sociosexual orientations, this has to do with your individual beliefs about sex. So we'll talk about the differences here in just a second, but we're going to have a restricted versus unrestricted sociosexual orientation. The basic idea is, do we feel that passion alone is okay, sex alone is okay, or do we feel like sex should take place in a relationship that also includes intimacy and commitment? So if you remember back to the first slide that we covered in Tuesday's video, the majority of people, at least in that particular research study in the United States, said that they felt comfortable with sex outside of marriage as long as it was still taking place in the context of a loving, committed relationship. At least that's what people would say on average on a survey. You may get something different from different populations, different generations, different genders. We're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. So first of all, one type of sociosexual orientation is a restricted orientation. So this is an individual that reports feeling that sex should take place in an intimate, committed relationship. This does not necessarily mean that the person thinks that sex should only take place in marriage, but that there should be a commitment level in the relationship before sex takes place. Now, the research on sociosexual orientations is correlational in nature. It has to be. I can't randomly assign you into your attitudes about sexual activity. Because of that, we can't determine causation. We know there's a relationship here, but we don't know the direction of that relationship. So all of these findings could be potentially open to different interpretations. So one thing that we see is that individuals who have this restricted sociosexual orientation, they're more likely to be committed. This makes sense, I think. If you believe that sex should only take place in a committed relationship, and you're in a relationship and you want to have sex, then you may be more likely to say that you're committed to that relationship. So there are different ways to think about that. They're also less likely to cheat. So maybe this individual is more committed to their partner, so less likely to cheat on their partner. Or also, maybe they're less likely to cheat because there are fewer options for partners. If you're in a relationship with someone that you are committed to and having sex with that person, then you're less likely to cheat on them because you're probably not in intimate, committed relationships with other people at the same time. So we see people cheating less here, or once again, reporting cheating less. And they also are more likely to have secure attachment styles. Once again, this is correlational. So it could be that having a restricted sociosexual orientation causes a person to have a more secure attachment style, as in being committed and thinking that sex should only happen in committed relationships could lead to a secure attachment style, or it could be that having a secure attachment style leads to a restricted sociosexual orientation, or it could be some of both. It could have to do with parenting that we received. We talked about how attachment styles develop because of early relationships with caregivers. Maybe the relationship that you have with the caregiver impacts not just your attachment style, but also how you view romantic relationships as well. On the other hand, some individuals would report having an unrestricted sociosexual orientation. So these would be individuals who would say that they are comfortable with sex taking place in uncommitted relationships. Still important to clarify here that consent is important, and letting the person know exactly what you're looking for in a relationship is important. But these individuals would say, as long as there's consent there, that there's no requirement for commitment here. Now, one thing to look at, it talks about dynamic, flirtatious, sociable people. This is not suggesting that being an extrovert means that a person has an unrestricted sociosexual orientation. It just means that people who have unrestricted sociosexual orientations are more likely to be extroverted than introverted there. So this could be associated with personality types. Also, just as you would expect, they tend to be less committed and more likely to cheat. So perhaps you are in a relationship with a person you're not committed to. So that could lead to cheating because you're not committed to your partner. Or possibly, if you feel like sex with someone you're not committed to is okay, then that means there are more potential sex partners with which to cheat. So once again, correlations, we can't determine causation here. So we tend to see insecure attachment styles, which we talked about secure attachment styles, anxious, ambivalent, and avoidant. And this is something we tend to see more in individuals who have that sort of avoidant attachment style. Also, as far as gender is concerned, men are more likely to say that they're comfortable with casual sex, which we also mentioned in the video on Tuesday, that perhaps this is because of the way that we view women who have casual sex. That's different from the way that we view men who have casual sex. So maybe it's because of that double standard there. All right, now, if we're thinking about extra-diatic sex, then the question might come up, why does that happen? So remember that extra means more. Diatic is a dyad, two, so more than two. So basically cheating, infidelity here. You're having a sexual interaction with someone who's not your partner, and your partner has not approved of that. Now, there are many potential reasons why this could occur. One possible one here, which I realize seems very cold and calculated and not very flattering, but certainly from a biological standpoint makes sense. A good genes hypothesis. This could be a situation where a woman would then cheat on a man because there is one partner who has resources and another partner who has good genes. So maybe you might say that if you're wanting to have a child, if you're a woman who wants to get pregnant, then it might seem ideal to have the partner who is providing the genetic material also be a partner who is committed and has the resources to care for you and said child. But this hypothesis would suggest that if you're in a situation where you can't have both from one person, you might choose to have both because you have one from each. So this would be where a woman would cheat with someone who has the kind of genetic material that they're looking for, but then raise them with someone who believes he's the father when he is not, but who has resources here. Now, your textbook gives this number of 2% of the world's children are being raised by men who don't know that someone else is actually the father. It's really hard for me to fathom how that could be an accurate number or how you could get an accurate number here. Certainly, you have to have maybe the mother might be able to give this information, but then she might not know for sure who is the actual biological father. And there's, once again, that concern about sharing that information and having it found out. So there's that. On the other hand, if you're doing something more like paternity testing, then, you have to have a situation where you have a DNA sample from all of the individuals who are involved. So it seems like it would be really hard to get an accurate number here. And it may actually be more than 2%. That could just be a rough estimate. Okay, so it is possible that some women might cheat because they're trying to maximize the resources for their offspring. So get good genetics from one partner and wealth and security from another partner. Of course, this next one seems pretty straightforward here. Individuals are more likely to cheat if they feel like their relationship doesn't have the quality that they're looking for. That's pretty straightforward. But then the question is, what can we do with this information? More likely to cheat if A, they're dissatisfied, and B, they think they can do better elsewhere. Now, if I am a couples counselor, I can't really do much about their quality of alternatives. There could be a little bit I could do there to help them change the way they think about other people so they don't find them as attractive, but there's not a whole lot you can do there. So my goal might be not to make your other options seem less desirable, but to make the relationship that you're in more desirable, to help that couple find ways of solving the issues that are there. Because even if you feel like you could do better elsewhere, perhaps, if you're really happy where you are, then there's no reason for you to cheat. So maybe we can zero in on that dissatisfaction and figure out what it is and try to find a solution for it. Just to be straightforward with you guys, my degree is in clinical psychology. I've done, one-on-one therapy. I've never done couples therapy. I think there's certainly a unique skill set that's needed for that. And I've never tried that. I'm kind of good with that. I just teach these days, which I enjoy doing. Okay, so differences here. Another thing that might lead to cheating has to do with sex drives between the partners. Now, it's been fairly well documented that men tend to have higher sex drives than women do. And if I had you guys in front of me right now, I'd ask you the question, why? And probably some of you would say testosterone, and that is the case. Men have higher testosterone levels. There is a correlation here between testosterone and sex drive, but that correlation is not as strong as a lot of people believe it is. If you take biological psychology, you'll find that males do have to have a certain minimum level of testosterone to engage in sexual behavior, but as long as they have that minimal level, there's not a direct correlation here with increasing the testosterone and increasing the sex drive. So men having a higher sex drive could be partially explained by testosterone. I think this also could be a cultural thing, that we have like an expectation for men to have a higher sex drive and for women to have a lower sex drive, perhaps. And one other thing to mention is that there are a lot of individual differences. When you look at differences between men and women, you can get an average number on something, but you're going to have so much variation from individual to individual. So there'll be some women who have much higher sex drives and some men who have much lower sex drives. But on average, men tend to report having more intense sexual desires and being more motivated to engage in sexual activity more frequently than women are. So when your textbook started looking at this issue, make sure I get all this pulled up here, several different things they found. One, men tend to say they're dissatisfied with the amount of sex that they get. More likely they're going to say that than women, which makes sense if we look at extra-diatic sex. We talked a little bit about in the last video that, what was the number? A third of husbands and a fifth of wives, something like that, that men are more likely to admit cheating. Of course, remember the caveat that one of my students made the argument that women are just less likely to get caught cheating. We could debate that if we were in class. I could get your thoughts on that. But when we're talking about sexual desires here, men, at least on a survey, say they're more likely to be dissatisfied. Also, when it comes to differences between men and women, men are more likely to report that they want sex sooner in a relationship. Now, we mentioned this last time that couples who have sex very early on in the relationship were less likely to have more desirable outcomes long term. Of course, that doesn't mean anything about any one couple, but on average, it is associated with maybe some less desirable outcomes. Men report spending more time thinking about sex. We already said that men are more accepting of casual sex, and men spend more money on sex. What does that mean? Well, there are many different things that could be put into this category, but I'm going to guess things like pornography, prostitution, and then maybe also gifts, dinner, trying to encourage a partner, perhaps. So men tend to have differences in their sexual behavior. Now, what we can see here is that women may feel uncomfortable sharing the truth on a survey. Maybe men feel like they have to report that they have higher sex drives or something will be viewed as being wrong with them. And maybe women feel like they have to report having lower sex drives or else something will be viewed as wrong with them. So that could also play a role in this as well. But if you're talking about a heterosexual relationship, this is where we can have frustration here. And certainly this could happen in a gay relationship as well. If you have one partner that has a higher sex drive than the other partner, then that can cause frustration as a couple tries to figure out how to handle that situation. So it talks here about women being the gatekeepers of sex. So a couple of different things here. One, certainly we need to be aware of the issues with sexual coercion. We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of today's slides. So certainly consent is important from anyone and everyone who's involved. So bearing that in mind, I think part of this has to do, honestly, with the economics of the thing. So if you have one partner that has higher drive, that's more demand, and the other partner has lower drive, maybe more of the product, and so has more control perhaps over that. So it talks about finding partners willing to offer various concessions, which we could debate, if we were in class, do we feel like that's a healthy situation of like using sex to reinforce behaviors, using sex to barter for chores or whatever the case may be. Of course, if you and your partner are happy, then it's not for me to tell you what to do or not to do here. Now, when we're talking about sexual satisfaction, there is a question here about how do you know what sex is supposed to be like? How do you know if you're actually satisfied? This is where it's tricky. You would benefit from having someone that you could talk to, someone that could help you sort things out. But on the other hand, because sex is such a taboo topic, we're not necessarily likely to go talk to someone. Maybe we don't talk to our family or our friends about this area because it just feels so awkward and uncomfortable. So most people say that they're satisfied with their sex lives, but as people get older, they're less likely to report being satisfied. Maybe this is because we already talked about as you get older, sexual activity tends to decline. Maybe this has to do with being with the same partner for a longer period of time. That doesn't necessarily have to be that. It talks here about people who've only had one partner in the last year as being more content. And this talks about being true in general, but being especially true for men. Men who had had fewer partners were more likely to be satisfied. And I think there could be several potential reasons for this, but the one that seems most likely to me is perhaps there's not a lot of unfavorable comparisons, perhaps, with previous partners. And maybe if a person has had fewer partners, there's not as much concern about comparison. Like there's the pressure, sort of a competition sort of thing here. So certainly that could be part of it, but this is a correlation. Is it that having fewer partners makes you more satisfied? Or is it that being satisfied means you're okay with having fewer partners? Once again, it's a correlation, could go either way. Okay, so satisfaction with sex. People are more likely to report being happy with their sex lives if they're having sex more frequently. This is correlational. And it completely makes sense. So this is correlational because I can't randomly assign you to how often you're having sex. But here, it could be that the couple having sex more often makes them feel happier about their sex lives, or it could be that the couples who are happier with their sex lives are the ones who are then having more sex. Either way, there needs to be a solution here if satisfaction is not there. But once again, then the question is, who do we turn to for advice? Now, certainly, I think a counselor, psychologist could definitely be a good choice for someone to talk to. But sometimes it's hard to talk to a psychologist. You don't really know this person well. And then to talk to them about something so personal can definitely be really difficult. One of my professors in grad school was telling me the story that was it someone that, I think it was a client that he had. It could have been someone that his supervisor had. I can't remember the details of the story, but the general idea of the story was that there was a couple that came into counseling and they were really unhappy with their sex lives. And so they started, asking questions like, what's going on? And they're like, yeah, our sex life is just terrible. It's only happening 15 times a week for 2 hours at a time. It's just, our sex life is just pitiful, And so then insert, shocked expression from the psychologist. And it turned out that this couple, only thing they knew about sex, they had learned from pornography. So they had very unrealistic expectations about what sexual activity was supposed to be like. So, two things. One, it is important for us to have good sex education. And two, it's important for a psychologist to know how to maintain a poker face so that you don't show your client that you're shocked when they say things like that. All right, good. So when we're talking about being satisfied with sex, it's really important to have an open line of communication with your partner. Now, that can be difficult because sex is often considered a taboo topic. It's one that we're not comfortable talking to our partners about. But then the question is, how is it possible that we're comfortable enough to have sex with this person, but we're not comfortable enough to talk about said sex with this person? Now, maybe it's because having that conversation feels really vulnerable. You're afraid of hurting your partner's feelings or making your partner feel self-conscious. I understand that. There is a way to communicate information without being hurtful here, without necessarily expressing what you don't like. You could phrase it in a more positive way, like, what if we did this? What if we tried that? Perhaps there is a way to phrase it that would be received well from a partner. There is a correlation here between having that clear communication about sexual issues and being more satisfied with your sex life. So even though something might feel a little bit awkward, then it might be worth it in the long run to go ahead and have that conversation. Sure. So it is important for partners to be able to talk to each other about what they want. Now, this can be difficult for a lot of reasons, but one thing that your textbook focuses on a bit is that this communication can break down when people don't speak clearly or don't clearly show what they want and what they don't want. Your textbook talks about the tendency, particularly in men, to believe that a person is flirting with them even if they're not. And so a lot of this research has been focusing on heterosexual individuals where a man believes that a woman is being flirtatious when she's actually not trying to be flirtatious. She's trying to be friendly. And this could just be one way that there can be miscommunication here. I think there could be several different reasons why this might be. We'll talk later in the communication slides about how women tend to do a better job of interpreting nonverbal cues. So it could be that men are not accurately interpreting. It could also be just social norm differences, that it's more expected of women to be friendly. And so, smiling and carrying on a conversation might just be a social norm for a woman, not necessarily meaning to indicate that she's interested. Certainly there can be communication breakdowns here. I remember a student telling me once that they ended up getting engaged. And I haven't talked to her since, but I'm assuming by this time they're probably married. But they were engaged. So it did end up working out okay. But she was friends with this guy, and she liked him, and she thought that he liked her. And one day he sent her a message that said, Do you happen to know a girl like you who would want to go on a date with a guy like me? And she got livid. What was actually happening was that he was trying to ask her out. But what she thought was happening was that he wanted her to set him up with one of her friends. So in the end, after a few days of, extreme frustration, they did sort that out and they were engaged by the point that I heard that story. But certainly we don't communicate as clearly as we think we do sometimes, and that can cause a lot of frustration. Okay. So we've already said that couples who are having sex more frequently tend to be happier with their sex lives. Also, couples who are happier with their sex lives tend to be happy with the relationship as a whole. Once again, this makes sense, but it's a correlation. And so we can't be exactly sure of the direction here. Is it possible that the positive sexual interactions make the relationship seem better? Sure. Is it that being in a healthy relationship makes the sex better? Certainly possible. Could be some of both. Or it could be a third variable causing both. Maybe it has to do with attachment styles. Maybe it has to do with commitment. Maybe it has to do with good communication skills, whatever the case may be. Now, then you have a question. If you have a couple and they're having problems, both specific to their sex life and also other problems as well, which one do you go after first? Because fixing the sexual problems could help the other problems, or fixing the other problems could cause the sexual problems to decrease. So this is something you have to choose on an individual basis, which one is the couple most comfortable with. But if you increase satisfaction in the sex life, then the couple's probably happier in general, and vice versa. So I guess my general advice here is go to counseling and communicate well, and let your partner know exactly what you want and what you don't want. So my last major topic here, before I talk a little bit about the exam, I can't have a set of slides on sexuality without talking about unwanted sexual behaviors. And this is a hard topic, but it is a topic that we need to address. I think we often don't talk about unwanted sexual behavior because we don't know how to do it well. Certainly, there are many reasons why this is hard. One thing is maybe as individuals we feel vulnerable. Maybe people we care about, like as a mother, as a sister, as a friend. I certainly, when I start thinking about unwanted sexual behaviors, that you think about the people that I care about, that I want to protect. So when we're talking about this, it's important to have this conversation. It's important to have this conversation with grace and with respect towards the individuals who are involved. So many times we frame this discussion in a way that casts shame on the victim, blaming the victim. Now, I want to say, first of all, that is never warranted. That is never okay. There is never a situation in which this is the victim's fault. On the other hand, we need to understand why we do that. Because it happens so frequently, there has to be a reason why. And if I had you guys in class, I'd, get you to bounce some ideas around. But one reason this might be is we want to feel like we can protect ourselves. So if we say that there was something about the person, something about the environment, something about the situation that caused the assault to happen, then I can protect myself. I can protect my daughter, my sister, my friends, because I can make sure that situation isn't repeated. Now, is that really accurate? No, we don't have complete control. We can't control everything, nor is it acceptable to suggest that the situation made it okay for this sort of thing to happen. So while I do understand we need to sleep at night and feel okay about ourselves, we need to make sure that the way that we're feeling okay about ourselves is not hurting individuals, re-victimizing the victims. So being aware of all of that. Certainly there are many different behaviors that could fall in this category of sexual coercion, different types of pressure and different types of behaviors. This is something that's in your textbook, just talking about, kind of a spectrum of possible behaviors here, as well as a spectrum of pressure that can be applied. Now, I think that with verbal coercion, it's a little bit tricky. At what point are we going to say we've crossed a line? When there's physical force involved, I think we could always say a line has been crossed. But when there's verbal coercion, at what point is it acceptable or unacceptable? Now, I am not a lawyer. I don't know the law on this. But I'm going to say that wherever we think the line is, we should stay well away from that. We shouldn't even get close to that. It's always better to be safe than sorry in this particular sort of situation. Now, then the question is, can we always identify who might be a perpetrator here? No. Some people are very good at charming other individuals, very good at manipulating. If you think about Ted Bundy, no one believed for a long time that he could possibly be guilty of these crimes. He just didn't seem the type. So we cannot always tell. But one thing that could be a potential sign, the type of attitude that a person has towards the individuals that they're victimizing. If we think about a man victimizing a woman, then how does a man view women in general? Now, of course, we have to be careful here not to suggest that women are the only ones who are victims of sexual assault. Of course not. Oftentimes, this is where we focus, and this is maybe where the attention goes, but there are other situations as well. But if, for example, we're thinking about a man who victimizes women, one thing that we often see is that the perpetrator will look down on the victim. And this has to do with that cognitive dissonance. If you hurt someone, you feel guilty about doing that. And you need to find a way to not feel guilty about doing that. Of course, the obvious answer is don't do it. But for individuals who are going to continue to do this, they might start to tell themselves like, well, that person deserved it. That person was asking for it. So they start to tell themselves these things that make them feel better about what they've already done, but also makes it more likely for them to do it again in the future. So it is possible that you might see some red flags here in the attitudes that an individual has towards other people. What can we do to try to reduce the frequency of sexual assault? I wish that we could prevent all cases. Unfortunately, we can't, but there's some tips here from your textbook. Once again, being aware of the attitude that a partner has towards individuals, towards sex in general. Beware of intoxication. I want to be really clear here. This does not make it okay. Just because a person is intoxicated does not mean that it is okay to assault that individual. And absolutely no circumstances is that okay. But what we are saying is to be cautious, because oftentimes those are situations where an assault may happen. So I'm going to encourage you guys, don't do drugs, right? Be careful. I'm not your mama, but I'm somebody's mama. Take care. There is something that I read about a while ago and I didn't follow up on, but I had read about it, something like nail polish that you could wear, that you could then stick your finger down in your drink. And if your nail polish changed colors, that meant that someone had put something in it. I'm not sure if that's something they actually have, might be something to look into, but being very cautious here. So then one question is, what about engaging in sexual activity when a person is intoxicated? Can an intoxicated person give consent? And I'm going to say probably not. And I'm going to say one of those things where if there is a line and you don't know where the line is, back way off the line. Wait until the individual is not intoxicated would be my advice there. The other thing I want to say about this is that if you've ever done a research study, they have you do an informed consent form. And part of that informed consent says you can leave the study at any time without being punished. No one will prevent you from leaving. So I think that's really important for the concept of consent when it comes to sexual activity, that consent is not consent unless it can be withdrawn. Like, you are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to say no. You're allowed to stop. Otherwise, that's not actually consent. Letting the person know in advance what you're okay with and what you're not okay with, and having a plan for how to handle if this individual tries to push something beyond where you're comfortable, all of that would be really important. Just generally respecting other people and respecting yourself would be so important. So I think we should have this conversation. I think we should have this conversation with our sons and with our daughters about what sexual coercion looks like, and what respecting another person looks like. So certainly, if you have thoughts or questions about any of this, please feel free to email me. So a few things. One, we are going to do an activity. I was going to have you do this activity in class, but we're obviously not in class. So I'm going to set it up in Canvas the same way that I set up activity 5. I'm going to set up activity 6 as well. So I'm going to have it open on at least by the 18th. I might have it open before then. And then I'll have it open for a week. So you'll be able to go into Canvas and do this. I'm going to ask you guys what couples could do to increase their satisfaction with their sex life. That's going to be the topic that I'm going to put in there for you. So we will have activity. Activity 5 is going to be due by the end of the day on the 18th. That was our activity from last Thursday. What was that activity? I'm trying to remember. Oh, like how has your gender or your age or the culture that you grew up in impacted your view of love, right? That was activity 5. That's going to be due by the end of the day on the 18th. Activity 6 is going to be due by the end of the day on the 25th. And I'm going to ask you to think about how a couple could improve their satisfaction with their sex life there. Don't forget that exam 2 is going to open right after our regular class time on the 18th. And then it will close right before our regular class time on the 25th. We will not be meeting for class on the 23rd because I'm giving you that time to take the test if you would like. The format of the test is the same as exam 1, so there'll be multiple choice, true, false, and matching. There will be those 2 opinion questions that I will go in after the exam closes and make sure that everyone got full credit for those. If you're a student who receives accommodations, please let me know if you need something different from the way that I had it set up for exam 1. And there is a study guide that's posted for you in Canvas. And there's also that extra credit writing assignment that's going to close at the same time as exam 2 that you can complete for a little bit of extra credit as well. So a lot of announcements. I'll be sure to send out some email reminders about that. Please let me know if you need anything. You guys stay warm, take care, and hopefully I'll see you on the 25th.